Dalva held the little embroidery scissors, the same ones her mother had used her whole life. Her hands trembled as she unpicked the hem of the wedding dress, that dress yellowed by time that her mother had never let anyone touch. And it was there, among the rotten threads and the worn satin, that she felt the paper. A folded paper, hidden for more than 20 years, waiting for that exact moment to tell the truth her mother had carried in silence for so long. "Mother," she whispered, her voice choked. "What did you hide from me?" She still did not know, but in that piece of worn fabric was written the story of a 20-year injustice, and also the proof that her family's love had been greater than any lie they tried to build on top of it. At the Okasha's homestead, a small property of red earth and fertile orchard, Zulmira was known as the most cheerful girl in the region, daughter of a humble farmer. She grew up sewing beside her mother, learning from early on that the work of the hands could support an entire household, and dreaming of the day she would have her own family, full of laughter and plenty. That day seemed to arrive when Doiste, the eldest son of the farmer Salustiano, fell in love with her at a harvest festival. Doisde was different from his younger brother, Anisio. While Doisde worked the land with his own hands and treated the workers like family, sharing even the last sack of flour in the bad years, Anuzio lived counting coins and measuring everything by how much it was worth, always suspicious that he was receiving less than he deserved. When Salustiano became very ill and no longer had the strength to run the farm, he left the land, divided by word of mouth between the two sons. But he had only begun the formal deed process in Doistit's name, who was the one who had taken care of everything for years and knew every inch of that ground. All that remained was to register the document at the registry office in the neighboring village, a 2-day journey on horseback that Doisti had been putting off because of the harvest. It was during that time that Doisti and Zulmira got married. The celebration was simple, under the Jequitaba tree in the yard, with accordion music, treats brought by the neighboring women, and promises whispered in the ear. Zulmira wore a dress she had embroidered herself, helped by the oldest seamstress in the village, Dona Fig. Nia, a woman of firm hands and an even firmer heart, who had seen almost everyone in those parts be born. On the eve of the wedding, Doisti sought out Donna Efigenia alone at the back of the yard, while the last guests were already saying goodbye. "I need to ask you a favor that cannot leave these 4 walls," he said, handing over a folded paper, still smelling of fresh ink. "It is the provisional deed to the land, signed by me and 2 witnesses, waiting for the official registration. My brother has been acting strange, talking about money in ways I do not like, asking too many questions about the boundaries of the land. I want this paper kept where no one will look for it, until I myself can register everything properly." "What are you afraid of, Sudoiste?" asked Dana Efigenia, serious. "Afraid that my brother will find a way to take what is not his. Well, I have not yet sorted out the paperwork," he answered, looking toward the lighted house. "I prefer to be careful." Dona Fig. Nia, without asking further questions, stayed up all night and sewed the document inside the hem of the wedding dress, between the lining and the satin, with stitches so well made and so similar to the rest of the hem that no one would ever suspect there was anything there besides thread and fabric. "Only I, you, and God know about this," she told Zulmira days later. "Keep this dress as if it were the most precious thing you have." Daughter Duistite's fear was not unfounded. A few weeks after the wedding, a strong fever, one of those that went from house to house in those days, put Doisti to bed for days. Anisio, taking advantage of his brother's moment of weakness and the confusion the high fever left in his mind, called a healer from outside, telling everyone he was the only one capable of treating that kind of illness, and insisted on taking Doistit for special care in a distant city, far from the village, under the care of people he trusted. Zulmira, desperate and still very young, trusted her brother-in-law, without imagining that this was the beginning of a larger plan. As soon as Doisdite was taken away, still feverish and without strength to react, Anisio spread through the village that his brother had worsened greatly during the journey and that, for safety, he would remain hospitalized for an indefinite time. Far from there, without visits, until he fully recovered. It is better if you do not cling to hope. Zulmira, said Anisio, with false pity on his face. From what they told me, he may not even remember you properly when he returns. That fever has already destroyed the minds of many people around here. Meanwhile, far from the village, Doistit was indeed fighting the effects of the fever, left in the care of a man paid by Anisio, who kept him isolated, fed enough to survive, but without means to send any news home. For a good while, dizzy and confused, Doistit could barely remember his own name properly, and the man hired by Anisio made sure to reinforce whenever he seemed lucid that your family no longer asked about you and that it was better to start life over alone. Later on, when your strength returned, back at the Okasha's homestead, without a husband, without news, and a few months pregnant, Zulmira was pressured by Anisio to sign documents that, according to him, only regularized the administration of the land, while Doistit did not return. Without understanding well what it was about, and still trusting her brother-in-law, she signed, not knowing that this sealed the registration of the entire farm in Unisio's name. Months passed without any real news of Doistit. Tired of waiting for a return that Anisio guaranteed should no longer be expected, and pressured to leave the main house for Anisio's own plans, Zulmira, already with the small daughter in her arms, decided to move to the neighboring village, find work as a seamstress, and start life over on her own, keeping the wedding dress at the bottom of the trunk, along with the hope that grew weaker and weaker of one day having true answers about what had really happened to her husband. Dalva grew up hearing only that her father had fallen ill early and needed to move away for treatment, and that, for circumstances her own mother said she did not fully understand, they had never again received news of him. She never knew the complete details, because every time she asked, she saw her mother's eyes fill with a sadness that she, as a child, did not know how to name. "Mother, will my father come back one day?" asked Dalva, still a little girl, sitting on the floor while her mother sewed by the light of a lamp. "I do not know, my daughter," Zulmira would answer, without taking her eyes from the sewing. Her voice choked. "But I keep hope every day, and I keep this dress too, because one day you will understand why it matters so much." What Dalva knew, and knew well, was that the dress in the trunk was sacred. It could not be touched, could not be sold, not even in the years of greatest hardship when even flour was missing at home. The years passed. Zulmira grew old. Her body, tired from so much work, bent over the sewing machine, and when Dalva was already 19 years old, her mother had a serious health scare, a fever that left her in bed for weeks and worried the entire village. On one of the most difficult nights, with Dalva sitting by the bed, holding her hand, still weak but lucid, made her daughter promise one thing. "The dress," she said, in a weak voice, "if one day I no longer have the strength to tell you everything, promise that you will not sell this dress or throw it away. Promise that you will keep it until you understand why." "I promise, Mother," said Dalva, crying beside her. "But you are going to get well. You are going to tell me everything with your own mouth. I know you will." And, to the relief of the whole village, Zulmira recovered, more slowly than she would have liked. But she recovered. Even so, even after improving, she never found the courage to tell her daughter the complete story, afraid of reopening a pain that was too old for both of them. The dress remained kept, untouched, at the bottom of the trunk, waiting for the right day, which Zulmira always postponed. A few more years passed. Dalva had become the most sought-after seamstress in the village, heir to her mother's talent and patience, who now, already older, helped while sitting, teaching new stitches and resting more than before. Her hands knew every type of fabric, every secret of a good finish, but they had never again touched the wedding dress kept at the bottom of the trunk. Exactly as she had promised on that difficult night, she lived with her mother in a small, well-kept house, supporting the two of them with her own work, respected by everyone, but with her heart still closed after a broken engagement years earlier, which had left her distrustful of men's promises. It was on an afternoon, delivering orders, that she met Vicente, a serious young man of soft speech, who worked as an assistant at the city registry office, helping to organize old land records of the region, stacked for decades in wooden cabinets. Vicente had grown up under the care of a blacksmith's uncle, who had taught him the value of honest work and of a word kept. And he saw in Dalva the same quiet strength he had admired since childhood. "You sewed this with great care," said Vicente the first time he came to pick up a mended clothing order for his uncle. "You can see it is not just work, it is affection. It is the only thing I know how to do properly," answered Dalva, without imagining that that simple conversation would be the beginning of everything. The courtship grew slowly, as good things usually grow, between Sunday visits, conversations at the door of the house, and small gestures of attention that gradually brought down Dalva's old distrust. Vicente always asked for her opinion before any important decision, and never raised his voice, not even when they disagreed. "You do not need to be afraid to trust me," he said one time, when she hesitated to tell about the broken engagement in the past. "I am not a man who promises what he cannot keep." Dalva used to taking care of everything. Alone for years, learned little by little that sharing life with someone was not weakness, it was rest. When he asked Dalva to marry him under a mango tree in the village square, with a simple ring bought with months of savings, she had no doubts. "I am going to wear my mother's dress," she said, still emotional, holding his hands. "I promised to keep it, and I think the time has come to understand why it was always so important to her." The dress, however, needed adjustments. Decades inside the trunk had left the fabric stiff and a little yellowed, and the length no longer suited Dalva's body, taller than her mother had been at that age. On a calm night, sitting by the light of a lamp beside her mother, who was knitting nearby, Dalva began to carefully unpick the hem, thinking of every stitch that her mother, and without her knowing, Donna Efigenia had placed there so many years before. It was then that she felt, between her fingers, something too rigid to be only the usual lining, a thin bolum folded, hidden between two layers of fabric, right in the middle of the hem. "Mother," said Dalva, her heart racing, "there is something here inside." Zulmira dropped the knitting at once, her eyes wide, and approached slowly, almost unable to believe it, carefully, like someone handling something too fragile for the world. Dalva opened the last stitches and took from inside the hem a yellowed paper folded in, for brittle with time, almost coming apart at the edges. Zulmira brought her hands to her mouth, recognizing at once what it was. "My God," she whispered, "I knew it existed. Your father had told me about it on the eve of the wedding, but I never imagined I would find it again after so many years. And in this way, it was a deed," Doistit's name written in firm letters, together with the names of 2 witnesses and the exact description of the lands of the Acacia's homestead, with the seal and signature of Salustiano himself, still alive, recognizing the division between the 2 sons. "Mother," said Dalva, her voice trembling, "you never told me everything properly about my father. I think the time has come." And there, sitting the 2 of them by the light of the lamp, Zulmira finally told everything she knew. The fever, the forced journey by Anicio, the stories he spread about his brother's condition, the documents that she herself, without understanding well, had signed because she trusted her brother-in-law too much, and the hope that had never truly died inside her, even after so many years without any news of Doisdi. "I never knew if your father is still alive somewhere," Dalva said, Zulmira, crying. "Anuzio always said it was better if I did not keep hope, that his mind had gone bad after the fever, that he might not even remember me anymore. But a part of me never stopped believing that one day the truth would appear. And look, it appeared right here in the hem of this dress." When she finally managed to compose herself, it was Vicente whom Dalva sought out the next day, taking the paper and telling everything her mother had revealed. "I need you to tell me if this is still worth anything after so many years," she said, "and I need to find out if my father is still alive somewhere." Vicente read the document carefully, examined the paper, the seal, the old handwriting, compared it mentally with other records he had already seen at the registry, and raised his eyes to her with a mixture of astonishment and determination. "This is worth much more than you imagine," he said. "And if your father was indeed taken by a man hired by Anisio, there must be some record of payment, some letter, some trail in the old books of the registry in the neighboring region. It will be difficult, Dalva, and it will take time, but I will help you search, no matter what it costs." Dalva looked at the dress spread on the bed, now with the hem open, revealing the secret that had crossed an entire generation to reach her, and then looked at her mother, who watched her with a mixture of fear and hope in her tired eyes. "My mother kept this her whole life. Out of fear," she said at last, "I will not do the same. I am going after that land, and I am going after my father, even if it takes the rest of my life searching." Chapter 3. The deed that returned to the light the path was not easy. Vicente, careful not to expose Dalva and Zulmira to unnecessary risks, began discreetly reviewing the old records at the registry, comparing dates, names, and signatures, night after work hours. He discovered that the clerk who had formalized Anisio's possession decades earlier had been removed from his post years later for other similar irregularities involving other lands in the region, which opened an important legal opening to challenge the old registration. What was still missing, however, was living proof, someone who could confirm the story behind the paper, and some clue about Doistit's whereabouts. That was when Dalva remembered a name her mother mentioned rarely, always in a low voice, like someone speaking of something sacred. Donna Fignia. They found an elderly seamstress living with a niece in the simplest house on the other side of the village. Her eyes already tired by time, but her memory still sharp as a new needle. When Dalva showed the dress and told the story, the old woman's eyes filled with tears. "I sewed this document with these hands," she said, holding the fabric like someone reuniting with a piece of her own past. "Your father asked me in secret on the eve of the wedding, out of fear of his brother. I always suspected that Anisio had done some wrong when he spread that story of treatment far away, but I never had proof, only the certainty in my chest that the whole thing smelled bad." "You have no blame at all," said Dalva, embracing her tightly. "Now I need you to help us prove all of this before the law, and who knows, find my father." With Donna Efigenia's testimony, the analysis of the original deed, and the irregularities found in the old registration, Vicente managed, at great cost and with some sleepless nights, to open a formal process to claim the legitimate possession of the lands in the name of Dalva, daughter and heir of Doistit. At the same time, going through old payment books from a neighboring old registry, he found the record of a sum paid by Anisio years earlier to a man from another city, described as caretaker, which confirmed part of the story told by Zulmira. Following that trail, with patience and letters exchanged between villages, Vicente managed to locate the city where Doistit had been taken, and, to the surprise and joy of everyone, he discovered that Doistit was alive. After the fever, he had indeed spent a good time confused and without complete memories, exactly as Anisio had planned, but little by little, as the years passed, the memory had returned. Too late for him to know how to return alone, without money and believing, because of the lies he had heard from the caretaker paid by Anusio, that his own family no longer wanted news of him. He had lived since then, working in a small carpentry shop, supporting himself alone, keeping the memory of his wife and a daughter he had never seen grow up, without the courage to believe that he would still have a place in their lives after so much time. When Vicente and Dalva reached him, telling the whole truth, Doistit could not hold back the tears. "I thought you had forgotten me," he said. His voice choked. "I came to think of returning several times, but the fear of being rejected after so much time was always greater than the courage." "No one forgot you, father," said Dalva, crying and embracing a man she knew only from stories. "My mother kept hope her whole life, even without knowing for certain what for." The reunion between Doistit and Zulmira weeks later was one of the most moving moments the village had ever seen. No words seemed enough in the face of so many lost years, So the two simply embraced for a long time, in silence, while Dalva watched beside them, finally understanding the weight and the size of the love her mother had kept during all those years, with Doistet back, alive and well. The process against Anicio gained even more strength. Faced with the gathered evidence, Dona Efignia's testimony, the records found by Vicente, and above all, Doiste himself, alive, telling in his own words what he had lived through. The justice recognized the original deed as valid, annulling the fraudulent registration made by Anicio decades earlier. The Acacia's homestead returned, by right, to the family of Doiste and Zulmira. Before everyone gathered under the same Jequetaba where Doistit and Zulmira had married so many years before. Anicio, already an older man bent by the weight of his own conscience, had no way to deny what he had done. "I took precious years from the life of my own brother, and from his family," said Anicio, his voice choked, his eyes moist for the first time in decades before everyone. "I did this out of greed, and I do not know if one day I will deserve your forgiveness, but I ask for it from the bottom of whatever good still remains in me." Doisday, after a long silence, approached his brother. "I lost years. That will not come back," he said, his voice firm but without anger. "But I prefer to spend the time I have left rebuilding, not holding on to hatred. You can continue living here if you are willing to live with honesty from now on." Monslater, Dalva, and Vicente were married under the same Jequitaba, with the mother's wedding dress, now without the paper hidden in the hem, but with the stitches redone by Donna Efigenia in person. Proud and moved to close, with her own hands, the cycle she herself had helped open so many years before. Doiste, alive and present, had the honor of walking his daughter to the altar, something he never imagined he would have the chance to live. And Zulmira, beside him, held his hand as if she were afraid of losing him again. Before entering the ceremony, Dalva paused for a moment beside her mother, looking up at the clear sky of that afternoon. "You did it, Mother," she said, with a smile through tears. "You kept the secret. You kept the fear. You kept the hope. And in the end, you kept the whole family as well." Zulmira squeezed her daughter's hand, looking at Doiste from afar, smiling. "I kept it because I never stopped believing that one day the truth would come back home," she answered, "just as your father came back." This story reminds us that not every silence is weakness. Sometimes it is the hardest form of love that exists, the one of continuing to wait, even without proof, even without certainty, carrying a hope that hurts to keep. Zulmira did not hide the truth because she wanted to deceive her daughter. She hid it because she did not have, in her time, all the answers to explain a pain so great. And even so, with faith that one day the truth would find its way, she kept it generation after generation, until the right hands were ready to reopen that hem and bring back everything that seemed lost forever. How many times do we give up too soon on a hope, without imagining that the answer may still be on the way, hidden in some place we have not yet had the courage to search? How many families, separated by lies and by the greed of others, can still be reunited if someone has the courage to pull the first thread of the truth? Here is today's reflection. Justice may take time, but it rarely forgets completely. And Truela, even kept in silence for 20 years, inside the hem of a dress, remains alive, waiting for the right hour to reunite those who were once unjustly separated. If this story touched your heart, leave here in the comments what you felt most. And if you have lived or heard of any family reunion similar to this one, do not forget to subscribe here to the channel to follow the next stories, because every week there is a new one waiting for you here. Until the next story.